They asked me like questions like, what happens if you're in a coma? Like, would you like the plug pulled on you? They ask you some very uncomfortable questions.
There are definite times where they just don't have the experience, or they've just accidentally have done something incorrect.
When you set up a trust, you're outlining exactly what you want, and then the role of a trustee is going to be to administer that. Hi everybody, Jose Luis Morales here. Welcome back to another episode of the Residual Real Estate Agent Show. This is episode number 125. Today we've got a very special guest. Her name is Angelique Friend. She is a professional fiduciary. She has represented hundreds upon hundreds of trusts in California. And today she is going to be giving us some tips and tricks about trust administration. And she's also going to be going over the responsibilities of a trustees and also kind of telling us some things that could go wrong if you're ever appointed as a trustee. Welcome to the show, Angelique. How are you?
Thank you. Thank you for having me. I'm happy to be here.
I'm excited about this one. I don't know if you know this, but you're actually the first guest besides my parents that are for the in-person interview. So I haven't had anybody else in person. So you're actually the first person. So
I'm family now.
Yeah. Absolutely. So if you wouldn't mind just starting off with who is Angelique Friend and how did you get involved in this wonderful world of trust administration?
Sure. I am president of probate services. We started probate services. I actually started under a professional fiduciary who was very prominent in our county for many years. That was back in early 2000s. And ultimately, she, after teaching me many years, has passed away. So then I became the senior in our office, and we've just grown from there. So,
how long have you been in this probate niche, if you don't mind me asking?
I started in 99 with
Okay.
Barbara, who was the senior fiduciary,
Yeah.
and I got licensed in 2009, and so quite a number of years.
Awesome. So almost like 22, 23 years.
I'm not that old, no.
Right? So you started when you were like 5, right?
Right.
That's funny. Good. So let's start off. Let's backtrack a little bit. Like, let's say that somebody is considering setting up a trust. What should somebody be thinking about? What should somebody be considering when setting up a trust? Because I almost feel like a lot of people, one, they don't ever set up a trust. If they do set one up, maybe they don't set it up the wrong way, or maybe they don't even have the right professional helping them. So let's backtrack before we get into the duties of a professional trustee or even a trustee. And let's backtrack to that, and then we can kind of move into what some of the duties are.
Sure. I definitely say that my number one recommendation is to hire a good estate planning attorney. I know some people try to do their trust without that. They create I know there's online programs and so on, but the reality is a good attorney can really guide you the right way. And so lining out what it is that you want, I think, is the biggest hurdle that people have. Who do you want your beneficiaries to be? Do you want any charities involved? Do you want certain family members excluded? And different things like that. So as you're going through that, an attorney can really help with all of that. Let's say you're going to disinherit someone. There's certain ways that you need to do that so that it doesn't become a problem when a person passes. So there's a lot of different items to think about. And then also do an advanced healthcare directive, any powers of attorney, so that if when you're living there are issues, you have a place to go with those things too. So,
yeah. So what happens if you don't have a living trust, or if you don't have a advanced healthcare directive? Like, does that just mean that somebody can just appoint themselves in that position? Or does that mean that the court will appoint somebody to kind of handle those? Or what would happen in that case?
So if you don't have a trust set up, your estate would go through probate, which is the court proceeding where the court does identify who your heirs are because you didn't identify it yourself, and who your beneficiaries are. If you don't have an advanced healthcare directive, it's a little different because when they're trying to make decisions for you at the hospital at your end of life, if you don't tell somebody in an advanced healthcare directive what you want, yes, it's going to be up to whoever's the closest person to you, maybe a relative, a spouse, to make some decisions for you. So if you don't tell anyone, it could leave you in a really bad spot. And I've seen that, where the hospital doesn't know where to turn, or they make a decision that maybe the family or the person wouldn't want to have made. So.
Basically, yeah. So I remember when I set up my living trust, they asked me like questions like, what happens if you're in a coma? Like, would you like the plug pulled on you? What happens if you're in a vegetable state? Like, what would you want? So like, my experience with setting up a trust was that they ask you some very uncomfortable questions, like as to who. The point that I wanted to make, and I think you made a really good point, is to have an attorney that specializes in probates and trust. Because if you don't, I would imagine like anybody can set up a living trust, but there's certain intricacies with having a specialist that they can almost guide you and say, hey, look, I've seen this go wrong in this case. I've seen that go wrong. If you write it this way, this is not going to happen. Even when you said that if you're going to uninherit somebody, there's like a very specific procedure as to how to do that. I also think, aside from which attorney to select as your person who drafts up the trust, I also think that the second most important, or maybe even the first most important, is who actually is appointed as the trustee. So can you maybe explain to us like what is the difference between like a professional trustee and just a trustee, maybe like a friend, a neighbor, a cousin, a mom, a dad, just for our viewers to be able to kind of...
There's a very distinct difference between a professional and a non-professional. A professional trustee has certain licensing requirements. You know, we have to be licensed by the state of California and bonded. There's a lot of laws that govern the way that we administer a trust. So I have to follow the client's wishes. It's inherent in what I do. The problem with appointing a friend or a neighbor, if they decide that they don't want to follow the terms of the trust, let's say I need a little loan, my mom doesn't mind, you know, that could really lead to a problem for the other beneficiaries. And there's not always a whole lot of recourse other than go to court and spend a lot of money on attorneys to try to get your money back or fight the trustee and get them removed. It's really important to have a professional, I think, normally, unless you
feel comfortable with somebody else.
Really comfortable. And like I said, it's not only that they're doing something wrong or malicious. There are definite times where they just don't have the experience, or they've just accidentally have done something incorrect. So
yeah. So what I find interesting, and I never thought about it from this perspective, is that the role of the trustee is really to follow the wishes of the trustor or the grantor. I'm not sure on the right verbiage, but that's really their role. Like, meaning like when you set up a trust, you're outlining exactly what you want. And then the role of a trustee is going to be to administer that. But the challenge is that it doesn't always work out that way. Meaning that as a trustee, you're entrusting in somebody to really not only follow your wishes, but also make certain decisions on behalf of what you wanted done. So I guess my next question would be like, because you've represented hundreds of trusts already,
I have.
Like, what would you say are some of like the challenges or some of the mistakes? Because what happens if the trust doesn't get administered correctly, sometimes the court steps in and then the court appoints somebody like you, and your job is to figure out what went wrong, maybe do a little bit of detective work. So can you kind of go over like maybe some of the issues that you've seen that maybe like knowingly, like maybe some of the ones that they knowingly did something that they knew that they should have done, and also maybe like unknowingly, like where maybe they thought they were acting on good faith on behalf of the trust, but really they were making a bad decision.
Right. Definitely. I think hopefully, being as positive as I can be, that most people try to not make purpose mistakes. And but there are, the one that sticks out in mind as you're talking is one of the cases that I was appointed on by the court after the son who lost all of his parents' money by investing it in a gold mine in Alaska. And then unfortunately, the company went bankrupt, and he's telling me, but they guaranteed me it was going to be at least a 20% return, and I was guaranteed to get my money back. Well, as we all know, there's no guarantees.
Yeah.
And then I got appointed and unfortunately had to put the parents in a Medi-Cal facility because they were out of money. So this is, one of those situations where the son didn't want to get his parents in this horrible situation where now they're broke and on Medi-Cal, but it just happened. And then you have obviously the other spectrum side of the coin where I'm appointed a lot in court because people just made foolish mistakes and maybe they needed a little money, took some money out, maybe they had a failing business or whatever their excuses are, but we're in court where they just took the money.
So there's instances where that actually does happen, where maybe somebody is taking cash from the trust. Maybe nobody realizes it until people realize, hey, why is the bank account like going down so rapidly? Like, I know mom's costs are only this, or I know that this only costs this. Why is this happening? And that's where somebody like you would be appointed to basically come in and almost like backtrack and see. The interesting part to me is that a lot of people, when they're picking who the trustee, and even for myself, I don't think about a lot of these things. I think, well, my Aunt Sally, she's a really good human being. I'm going to appoint her, but Aunt Sally may not have the financial knowledge to make the best decisions for a trust, or may think that she's making a good investment and ends up being a bad investment, even though it was a guarantee. Or they end up appointing somebody else, and that person is going through a hard time financially and ends up taking money. So if that does happen, like what does that look like for you? Like, let's say you get appointed by the court, like, is your job to figure out almost like what went wrong and almost like report that back to the court? And what does that look like if you do have to do that?
So I do that often. Unfortunately, more cases than I think people would even want to know about. And I get the financial information as much as I can. I subpoenaed the bank records. We do an accounting. It's basically a forensic accounting where we go back and we see a lot of times people will transfer money in and out of accounts or to their own personal accounts. And so we have to find out where did all the money go and then report it back to the court. And obviously those are fraud, and they could be in a lot of trouble. But there's not always recourse to go after these people, or maybe we'll get a judgment against them, but then what's a piece of paper saying they owe money unless there's some kind of assets that they can. Meaning
if that person doesn't have any money to pay the money back, it's like, yeah, even if you do have a judgment saying like that they owe this amount of money, they can't. So I think that's the important part, that if you are appointing a trustee, just know that you have options as well too, and know that it doesn't have to be a friend, it doesn't have to be an uncle, it doesn't have to be at a bank. You can actually interview different professional trustees and see who is a good match. And I think where the benefit that I see is that, as opposed to maybe hiring or appointing somebody that has never done this before, you're appointing somebody that has done this hundreds of times, that already knows where all the pitfalls are and can really guide the family to the best possible outcome. So that's really what I see. And then the other thing is, a lot of people don't think anything will ever go wrong, but how often do things go wrong?
I guess I don't see all the good cases that don't go wrong. I only see the cases that do. Something did go wrong. So I would say more than not, unfortunately, in my eyes.
Over time, yeah.
Yeah. I mean, there's a lot of things that can go wrong. So.
Yeah.
And not only malicious. I mean, I think there's a lot of mistakes that can just be made throughout the process.
Yeah,
So,
by accident,
by
or maybe by
accident.
not even having the right advisors, right? Maybe not having the
Exactly.
right financial advisors, maybe not
Right.
having the right accountants, maybe not having the right
Real estate agent.
real estate agent as well, too, right? Yeah,
Yes.
yeah. If you get the wrong advice from a real estate agent, that could affect as well, too. So
Yeah.
I think that's the importance of having somebody. So what I did want to talk to you is I wanted to just ask you for like some tips and tricks. Like, let's say somebody just got appointed as a trustee. What should they do and what shouldn't they do?
Well, I would say my number one advice is do not ever commingle funds between your own personal funds and anything personal to the trust. I mean, that definitely there needs to be a distinct line as if it was not yours. I think that's where a lot of people go wrong is, they might be a beneficiary and they think, well, I'll just take a little bit now. I'll get an advancement on my inheritance. And that's definitely never allowed. The other tip I think is really like what you said, surround yourself with good qualified people that can help guide you. So if you do have a question and you don't know, feel free to call your attorney. Obviously if you know of a professional trustee, I'm always available. You can always call me. Depending on what the assets that are in the estate will kind of dictate where you should go. So if you have a piece of real estate and you need to sell the real estate, going to the right professional broker is really important, real estate agent. So things like that. It just depends on what's in your estate. But
So surrounding yourself around the right team of professionals, not only that are financial advisors, but I would imagine also that have some sort of experience in trust and estates as well too, I would imagine. So like, let's say somebody does have to sell a piece of property. Like let's say they were appointed as trustee, person's wishes were to sell all of the real estate. How would somebody go about, or can they just hire any real estate professional to do that? Should they maybe interview a couple of different people? Should they maybe get recommendations from people? What advice would you give somebody in that department?
definitely interview lots, get lots of recommendations. I would say, unfortunately, just like in every profession, there's great ones and there's not good ones. So I think that you definitely also need to ask the questions about what experiences do they have, and do they have experiences in trust administration and probate sales, because that really makes a difference. So there's different forms, I believe. I'm not a real estate expert. You are more than I am, but I know that there's a different process. I know that if this is a court case, the court puts different requirements, even maximum commissions that can be charged. So it's very important to definitely talk to somebody that you know.
Yeah. A tip for our viewers is usually the court doesn't like to see more than a 90-day contract, and usually the court doesn't like to see more than a 5% compensation. So if you're interviewing real estate agents and you're appointed as a trustee, keep in mind this is in California. One of the questions might be to the real estate agent, be like, hey, look, how long is your listing agreement? If they say anything over 3 months, that might be a red flag that real estate agent doesn't have probate or trust experience. If you ask them what their commission is and they say 6%, that might be a red flag that maybe they don't have sufficient experience in these type of cases as well too. So there's things there that you should be looking out for. What about as it relates, you talked about something called commingling of funds. For our viewers that don't know what that is, what does that mean? Like, what does the term commingling of funds mean?
So, if you take even $5 out of your own account and you put it into the trust account, or vice versa, that is commingling of the account. You don't ever want to put your own funds into the trust account or take trust money out to pay for your own expenses. I would say that's, a lot of what I see is I just needed a loan, or I just needed to pay this bill. I was in a tough situation. Those are the kinds of things. If you do need to do something like that, you better ask for court approval, and the court better approve it. Because if they find out after the fact, it's bad news.
It's tough.
Yeah.
They're probably going to lose their right to be appointed. What about like
Definitely be removed.
What about documentation? Like, is there like certain things that they should be documenting? Should they be notifying beneficiaries of certain things? How often should they be maybe communicating with them as well too? Any tips and tricks?
Yes. I mean, obviously receipts, I always say save every receipt. When you do a sale, like for real estate, there are notices that need to go to the beneficiaries, and NOPAs they're called. This is all really important. And if you've never done a notice of proposed action, a NOPA, you probably have no idea what I'm talking about. So it would be a whole nother podcast for us to talk about. But there are lots of different things throughout the process. And this is why I'm saying it's so important that you appoint somebody who has some kind of knowledge.
Kind of experience. Yeah, because a lot of times, well, at least the way I deal with it, sometimes I get newer trustees, and a lot of times they're overwhelmed. And because they're overwhelmed, sometimes they make bad decisions because it's overwhelming. Not only are they having to deal with everything that they normally have in their life, but now they have this additional responsibility as well too. Now, for our viewers that don't know what a notice of proposed action is actually a notice in real estate that gets sent out after you open up escrow to all the beneficiaries, and it gives them all the terms of the purchase agreement, and it gives them a certain amount of time to object. What that does is that protects the trustee from any of the beneficiaries ever coming back and saying, oh, I didn't approve of that sale, or you came in at too low of an amount, or you undersold the property as well too. So it gives them the hey, look, this is what the terms are. Say something now or forever hold your peace. So there's certain things that as a trustee you can do to protect yourself, basically, as a trustee. Good. Any finishing words or any final thoughts, Angelique, that you think would be helpful to maybe somebody that is creating their trust, or maybe somebody that just got appointed as the trustee? Any final tips of advice that you can give them?
Well, we kind of hit on a lot of it. I think the only thing we didn't touch base a lot on is just there's kind of different roles. There's the financial piece of things, as we talked about, obviously keeping the finances separate, paying bills, all of that part. But then there's also the medical aspect. And so I think one of the things that kind of makes our company different, Probate Services, is that we do both of those. We do the financial piece, and we can also step in for medical. And we also have, caregivers, if you ever need recommendations on caregivers or case managers. We do a lot of medical, taking people to the doctor. We have a lot of special needs clients, so they're not all elderly. So we kind of specialize in some of that special needs and different things that other professional fiduciaries don't do. And so I think kind of one of the tips that I would say is just there's a big difference when you create your documents, and the financial person doesn't necessarily have to be the same as the medical person. You can have maybe a loved one make your medical decisions, but that person might not be trusted for your finances, or vice versa. And so, we can do part of it for you, or any professional can really do part of it, or all of it. And so I think that's the thing to keep in mind.
I think that's really important. Good. And then how could people get a hold of your company, Probate Services? Like, let's say that they saw this interview and they're like, wow, we love Angelique. We want to interview her for potentially being appointed as a trustee. How could somebody get a hold of you?
Well, and they can always call me for advice if you have issues and you need to talk to me. But you're more than welcome to call. Our phone number is 805-604-1998. We are located in Little Camarillo, California, but we can help anywhere throughout the United States if you have any issues.
Awesome. And for all of our viewers out there, we had Angelique Friend today. She's a professional fiduciary. She has represented hundreds of trusts. Today she gave us some tips, some tricks, and kind of shared with us sometimes things that could go wrong in a trust administration. So if you're been appointed as a trustee and you need some advice, reach out to Angelique. If you have a property that you may be interested in selling, that's what we do for a living. Thanks again to all of our viewers. We appreciate you watching, and thank you, Angelique, for coming on and sharing this knowledge with us.
Yeah.
Awesome.
Appreciate it.
Yeah.